get wrecked by the best fuck silence!
Where do I start? With my mangled and broken body? Or maybe my face appearing on every local news station with the caption, "Wanted for questioning." Shit. No. I'll start with some life-saving advice. Stay the fuck off of Tinder. I'd never been one for online dating. It just seemed like skipping half the steps in meeting someone. Like an odd forced interaction where inevitably women just think you're trying to hook up with them. And you are, don't get me wrong, but not necessarily right away. And I wasn't out looking for a one-night stand. Well, I listened to my idiot friends. I let them sign me up on that god-forsaken app. It had been over a year since I broke up with my girlfriend. We were together for 5.5 years. That was pretty much my entire adult life, and I thought she was the one. I wanted to move forward. She didn't. She left the state with some asshole, and it fucking crushed me. I absorbed myself in my hobbies and shut away inside my apartment. Work and home were my places. I should have left it that way. My friends told me they just wanted me to be happy. They said they just wanted to help me through this rough patch. After months of pressuring me, I finally gave in. Mostly because I was tired of hearing it. I let my best friend sign me up on motherfucking Tinder. For obvious reasons, names and locations are either going to be left out or changed. As I said, I'm currently a wanted man, and no, I didn't hurt or kidnap some poor girl. After a few minutes of disagreeable biofilling and picture selecting, my profile was up and running. Being the great guy that he is, my friend even paid for me to have the premium service. Whatever the hell that meant. Yeah, thanks a lot. When seeing that I was still apprehensive about using the service, he took it upon himself to start swiping for me. He had my attention at that point. I snatched the phone from his hand, and he laughed, saying that one of us was going to use it. I didn't trust his judgment. It was honestly surprising how many attractive women popped up near me. I also felt scummy swiping women into what boiled down as a hot or not list. I presumed they would be doing the same to me, and I'd be lying if I said I liked the idea. We hung out for a few episodes worth of swiping and web browsing before I heard a life-changing ding. Nervously, I checked the phone to see the match notification. My first match. Let's call her Beth. A beautiful young blonde woman with piercing, almost gray-blue eyes. I was stunned that a girl that pretty would be interested in me. My next thought was catfish. If something seems too good to be true, it likely is. Then the message came in. Hey, smiley face. My friend nudged me while reading over my shoulder and told me that a hey with 3 Y's meant she wanted the D. I punched him in the arm and promptly told him to fuck off. He left soon after, and I spent the rest of the night messaging with Beth. I was still pretty skeptical about her being who she said she was. But when we scheduled a date for the following night, I figured the mystery would be solved soon enough. I was honestly looking forward to the date. It had been a long time since I talked and flirted with a woman. The next day came, and I was getting nervous. I started thinking up ways to get out of the date or put it off. But my friend wasn't having it. I guess he knows me pretty well, because without me saying a word, he threatened to send my mom a pretty embarrassing video of myself drunk at a party from years ago if I canceled the date. Of course, there is no way he could have known what would happen. But fuck, what a dick. As time ticked down, I became more and more nervous. Next time, I'll listen to my instincts. It wasn't nervousness I was feeling. It was that primal sense every being has when you can feel some shit just isn't right. At the time, I told myself to man up and go on a date with a woman like a normal person. Nothing to be afraid of, right? The time came, and I took an Uber to the nearby Italian restaurant. It was almost relieving when I arrived and she wasn't there. I was thinking she was an obvious catfish. She, or he, I suppose it could be, does this all the time for attention, and then bails out on the actual date. Sitting at the table I had reserved by myself, I became lost in thought. This could work out. I wouldn't have to go on an awkward date with a stranger and potentially make a fool of myself. My friends would get off my back. So I might as well order some food to go while I'm here. Take it back home, watch a little Netflix, and end the night with some video games. A perfect plan that completely fell apart in the next instant. The front door opened, and an absolutely gorgeous blonde woman in a red dress walked in. Her hair seemed to flow behind her, like a mermaid underwater as she strode. By this time, the entire restaurant had turned to look. Her presence was undeniable. The only thing I could think was, holy shit, it's Beth. She looked even better than in her profile pictures. She sauntered right over to my table, smiling and waving like a Japanese schoolgirl. It was unbelievably dorky, and I couldn't believe she was here to see me. She pulled out the chair across from me, sat down, and stared directly into my eyes while smiling. Hey, Beth. How are you? It was the absolute master-grade smooth sentence I was able to get out. As I worried about every conceivable aspect of myself, she seemed entirely unbothered by my complete incel-level idiocy. Beth started asking me questions, and before I knew it, a genuine and good conversation was going. The only thing reminding me how out of my league she was were all the envious stares and dirty looks from other restaurant patrons. The waiter didn't seem to like me much either, but I genuinely didn't care. I was actually having a good time, and we were hitting it off. All too early, we had finished our meals and even dessert. The waiter walked by and dropped off our tab, completely unprompted. I guess he wanted us to leave, although I will admit they were getting close to closing. I paid our bill, of course, and even tipped the undeserving server 20%, and we were out the door. I was expecting to give Beth an awkward half handshake, half hug, goodbye, and then be on my way, probably never hearing from her again. What actually happened was she grabbed my hand, interlacing our fingers, and whispered that we should take a walk. Her hands were warm, almost unbearably so. I was in a daze, and I hardly remember walking through the streets into a nearby park. It was just like one moment I was there, confused, but oddly content. Covering nearly 2 square miles, the park was fairly large and completely empty. It was dark out now, and rows of streetlights lined the walkway every 100 feet or so. Beth walked ahead of me, leading me to who knows where. She was enchanting. I was but a fly caught in her web. I really couldn't think at that moment. I was transfixed on her, watching the way the streetlights framed her face as we walked in and out of their influence. And suddenly, we were no longer in the light or on the path. Instead, moonlight filtered through the thin cloud cover to give off an ominous, dull glow. I blinked several times, trying to catch my brain up to my body. But everything was so off. I felt like a scratched CD in my old Walkman, skipping through parts of an unknown song. Looking around revealed a wooded area with no clear view of the walkway or any nearby streetlights. I looked back to Beth to ask her what was going on, but her deadlock gaze froze the words in my throat. Suddenly, I had the overwhelming urge to run, but my body refused to move. Beth slowly slid the straps of her silky red dress over her shoulders and let the garment fall to the ground, revealing her naked body. Her milk-white skin was almost glowing in the dull light, my eyes unable to look away from her incredible figure. Beth curled her index finger, beckoning me to her. My mind screamed at me to go to the stunning naked woman calling for me. But something much more profound and instinctual screamed even louder not to. I don't know what it was I caught in that moment, but everything was just slightly off, imperceptibly abnormal. I could feel my leg wanting to take me closer to her, but I fought it with every ounce of stubbornness within me. She seemed almost surprised by my stillness, her head turning to the side while her eyes remained locked on mine. Cold fear pushed electric adrenaline through my veins as I watched her continue tilting her head, parallel with the ground, and then even further as the vertebrae began to pop audibly. I couldn't fucking believe what I was seeing. I kept thinking this has to be some sort of prank. Her neck continued to twist almost all the way around before a stomach-turning rip revealed a messy red line that started dripping blood. The rip spread, followed by the grinding sound of bone on bone. Beth's bloody spine started extending out of her ripped neckline. The first few inches revealed vertebrae that looked to have gory spikes protruding from either end. Her eyes were rolled back into her head, showing only the whites, and her mouth opened as if she were screaming, but she never did. My body trembled as I watched the horror show, absolutely transfixed by disbelief. The first few serrated neck bones must have cleared the way. With a fleshy rip, her spine shot out of her open neck hole a good 3 feet into the air. Red droplets sprayed up like a cartel fireworks show. I swallowed hard as my eyes rose to meet her face, and took in the hellish bone serpent that connected her head and body. Her eyes rolled back to meet my gaze. Now, the rotting white you'd expect to see from a corpse. A nightmarish grin spread across her face as her head snaked down through the air to rest inches away from me. The popping and cracking of her disjointed movements mixed with the soft pattering of her blood dripping to the ground. She slowly stuck her tongue out and ran it up my cheek, sliding it gently into my ear. It felt like being violated by something dead, the smell of rot and copper filling my nose. But the revulsion was enough to snap my body back into action, taking a quick step back and pulling myself away from her grotesque tonguing of my ear. Her head swayed back to the side, eyes locking with mine, an aura of rage and hunger burning from behind them. She opened her mouth so wide that it ripped at the cheeks, revealing rows upon rows of jagged teeth running down her throat. The disgusting tongue spilling from her mouth split into two parts, extending a foot from the infernal maw. I'd seen enough. There was nothing left to know. The only reasonable thought I could muster was, "Fuck this." I cocked my right arm back, turning my hips, and rocketed my fist into Beth's temple. It was a solid punch. A fight-ending punch, I'd wager. Sending her head and serpentine spine soaring back towards and then past her body, catching itself and then snapping back to see my silhouette running into the darkness. My dad taught me two things. Never hit a woman, and never run from a mess you created. Regarding this situation, I'd have told him that isn't a woman, and I don't give a fuck. My legs pumped like pistons, pounding the ground and carrying me forward at a pace I didn't realize I was capable of. Bushes and branches stung and cut at my skin as I passed them, but at that moment, I didn't feel it or care. Just ahead was the hanging glow of street lamps. I naively saw them as safety. Sprinting into the light, I immediately took a right and headed down the path towards where I'd entered. Hope nearly filled my chest when I noticed two people walking the same way towards the same exit, about 200 feet in front of me. I shouted for help and waved my hands as I ran toward them. They turned to look for a mere instant before they both started running away from me.
Hey, wait!
Was all that I managed to get out before something slammed into me with the force of a speeding car. My body was sent flipping and rolling off the path and through a flower bed before painfully colliding with a tree. The air was robbed from my lungs as I clutched at my chest, gasping for breath. I could feel at least one of my ribs was broken. Before I even had a chance to regain my breath, Beth was on me. Her strength was unbelievable. She flipped me onto my back before slamming one of her feet onto my right thigh. But her legs had changed. They had split into thirds like peeled string cheese. Each third consisted of wiry sinew that ended in a large claw, creating a pair of hellish tripod legs. So it wasn't her foot on my leg. It was a long, thick talon that she pressed slowly into the meat of my thigh. As I screamed in agony, she seemed to savor my pain, tilting her head back in ecstasy while squeezing one of her exposed breasts. The bones on her fingers had elongated, splitting through the skin and ending in sharp points. This thing was a fucking nightmare. I tried pulling the talon from my leg to free myself, but that only got her attention. She emitted a horrid screech before her twisting, exposed spine brought her hideous face directly above mine. She snarled, baring sharp fangs at me, and then stabbed her pointed claws into my left shoulder. I could feel her fingers flex and dig inside of my skin as I screamed.
Fuck you!
She liked it when I cried, breathing in my pain with chattering teeth. Slowly, she pulled the bone claws out of my ruined shoulder and licked them clean of my blood. New waves of pain shot through my wound as she buried her face in it, drinking and biting at the damaged flesh. I'd never been through such agony before. My world was going blurry, and the merciful dark of unconsciousness begged me to let it take the pain away. I wanted to acquiesce, and I wanted this nightmare to be over. I almost let it. One thought kept running through my mind. This fucking bitch is going to kill me, and all that will be remembered about me will be that I was something's last meal. No, I wouldn't make it easy. I wasn't going down without a fight. My right hand reached around the ground slowly, while I tried ignoring the agonizing pain shooting through both my shoulder and thigh. Then I felt it, hard and cold. A rock about twice the size of my fist. Gripping it in my hand, I carefully turned it until I had the best hold I could manage. Careful not to tense my body, I raised the rock and cocked my arm back. Her twitching body froze, and my heart skipped a beat or two. I thought she saw or sensed my incoming attack, and my throat would be ripped open in the next instant. But instead, she drove her vile tongue back into my open wound. If it weren't for the pain, I'd have smiled. My right hand flew towards her head, connecting hard with her temple, an audible wet crack letting me know I'd done some damage. Beth's body fell off me, the talon pulling out of my leg, which let blood flow out at an alarming rate. But there was no time to worry about the long-term dangers. At least, long-term compared to the alternative. I rolled over onto my knees and brought the rock down towards her head. But the snake-like spine contracted and pulled away at the last minute, leaving me to flop onto the ground. With only one usable arm, I couldn't catch myself. Her clawed hand drove towards my face, and I rolled away just in time to feel the air whoosh past my cheek. While spinning, I kicked out with my good leg, catching her fingers that had pierced the ground and snapping a few. The scream she let out told me I'd caused slight damage. Before I could right myself, she was standing over me, and her claws came down towards my face. My left arm weakly flopped up to intercept, and fire exploded through my nerves as she tore through my fragile flesh. The other hand immediately followed and swiped across my chest, tearing my shirt and leaving long bloody lines. I didn't wait for the next attack or get lost in the pain. I brought the rock into the side of her knee, hard.
Go, bitch!
It cracked and slightly buckled. I hit it in the same spot, again and again, fast and hard. She screeched while falling onto her side. I half limped, half scrambled to my feet, the bleeding leg hardly doing more than dragging behind me. The long pointed spine rotated her head to find my location, but it was too late. Stepping onto the inhuman spine, I held her head in place. Our eyes locked for just a moment, and I could swear her appearance shifted back to match the Beth I'd first saw. Not a fucking chance. I brought the rock down as hard as I could, right onto her forehead. The skull cracked, and I hit her again. This time, the skin and bone denting and malforming. Over and over, I smashed the thing with that rock until her head was left bloody and destroyed. Standing to my feet, I limped down the path, letting the blood-covered rock fall from my hand. Exhausted and in agonizing pain, my only goal was to find somebody and have them call an ambulance. The trail of blood I was leaving was more than cause for concern, and I had no idea what happened to my phone. I then heard a noise that sent despair echoing through my mind. Crunching and creaking of bones behind me. I gave one glance to see Beth's skull reforming and fixing the damage I had done. I didn't waste another second. Rushing forward at the fastest speed I could muster with one leg and a bleeding, battered body. Making it to the street and out of the park, I screamed help like the potential murder victim I was.
Help! Help me!
There was no one.
Somebody! Help!
I saw lights shining through the stained glass windows above the cathedral door. I don't know exactly why, but something in my brain registered the old Catholic Church as safety. Ironic, considering I'd always thought the brick construction and Gothic style to be creepy. I stumbled up the steps with one good leg and one good hand pulling me up the guide rail. My grip yanked the iron door handle, the old wood creaking in protest before I was hit from behind with incredible force. I was sent ragdolling into the church, breaking several pews and bones along the way before coming to rest at the foot of the altar, on which rose a tall metal cross depicting the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. At this point, I was somewhat concussed, and my thoughts became little more than jumbled ramblings. But I pulled myself up the altar towards the cross, falling once, but picking myself back up. My hand gripped around the cold metal before I felt coals on my back. Searing pain as that bitch raked her claws across my back. Once, twice, 3 times. I didn't have the energy to scream, not even when she sank her jaws into my upper shoulder and neck. My body was so thoroughly battered, I was practically dead at this point. With the last bit of defiance I could muster, I pulled the cross off the altar and let our bodies fall back together. She spun as we fell so that I would hit the ground and she would land on top of me. A weak smile crossed my lips as I positioned the cross to rest on her face. We hit the ground hard, her weight crushing my already broken form. But gravity was on my side, driving the top of the cross through her eye and into her brain. Not even a screech left her vile lips as the monstrous weight on my back turned to dust. The last thing I heard was the metal cross clanging on the floor before I lost consciousness. I awoke what I found out to be several weeks later, in a dingy, musty stone room, lit only by a candle on the wall. But that is a story for a different day.